Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Washington. In the book 11th Day, the full story of 9/11, Bob Graham, who was the co-chair of the Congressional Joint Inquiry into 9/11, told the authors of the book the following. The Saudis were facilitating, assisting some of the hijackers. And my suspicion is they were providing some assistance to most, if not all, of the hijackers. It's my opinion that 9/11 could not have occurred but for the existence of an infrastructure of support within the United States. By the Saudis, I mean the Saudi government and individual Saudis who are, for some purposes, dependent on the government, which includes all of the elite in the country. Now joining us are the authors of 11th Day, the full story of 9/11, Anthony Summers, who's a former BBC journalist, and Robin Swan, who is a DC-based freelance journalist. Thanks very much to both of you for joining us.
Our pleasure.
So, Anthony and Robin, Anthony, you have a story that broke in the Miami Herald today. You wrote together with Dan Christensen. Why don't you quickly tell us what that is, because it seems a bit of a tip of the Saudi iceberg.
What led to the story, for me, was one of those typical frustrating, long delayed bits of reporting. Several years ago, I met a counter-terrorist agent in Venice, Florida, where 3 of the hijackers learned to fly. And I interviewed him on other things that were not particularly dramatic or important, but related to the build-up to 9/11. And at the end of the evening, there was something he was clearly holding, wanted to talk about, but he felt difficult to discuss. And I'd always wanted to go back and find out just what it was, and I have now found out. And what has been revealed to me by him and multiple other witnesses, as I eventually discovered, is that in the months before 9/11, there was a house in a gated community near Sarasota, which is very close to Venice, where the hijackers were. And the house was owned by a Saudi and lived in by the Saudi's son-in-law. And they were not popular in the gated community because they didn't keep the house very well and so on. And what neighbors particularly noticed was that there was a lot of visits at night, at unusual hours, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And this was reported to the FBI and to law enforcement soon after 9/11, because people wondered whether there was a connection between the Saudis at the house and the 9/11 conspiracy. And it turned out, after lots of hard work, that indeed there was a connection. That when they did a phone link analysis of the calls made to and from the house that the Saudis lived in, that they linked back, sometimes at one remove, to the 4 men who'd been learning to fly and eventually were pilot hijackers on 9/11. They also discovered, and this was perhaps the best evidence of all, when they checked with the gate records, where the comings and goings were logged and noted, and where the number plates, the registration plates of cars were photographed, they discovered that those cars and the people who'd been in the cars also connected directly with the 3 pilot hijackers who'd been learning to fly just a few miles away at Venice, California. So it's a new and key indication that the hijackers had support from at least a Saudi living in a house just outside Sarasota. The one thing I've left out, which is very important, is that this came to the notice of the authorities and alarmed the people who ran the Prastancia development in the first place, because the Saudis who lived in the house vanished, departed, not to return, just 12 days before the attacks on 9/11.
And as you point out in your piece, they departed leaving cars and furniture and other things in the house.
Oh, yes. They left, leaving unattended, abandoned vehicles that they had just re-registered, and a brand new PT Cruiser which they bought only very short time, I think maybe a matter of days before they vanished. And in the house, they left dirty diapers in the bathrooms. The beds were made, clothes hanging in the closet. One computer was still left there. Another one had been there clearly because the cord was still there, but the computer had been taken. The pool still running, toys in the pool. It was clearly a very rapid, hasty departure.
Just to go over again the specific links between the people living in the house and the 9/11 conspirators.
One of the things that we've put together now is, this would not be an interesting story if it was simply a story about an empty house and some abandoned cars. The phone records show that Atta, the lead hijacker Atta, and the pilots Jera and at least one of the other muscle hijackers, Al-Shari, were known to call and visit the house. And likewise, a very interesting figure who we write about in our book, Adnan Juma. Now, Juma was and is the son of a Saudi cleric who had been affiliated with a well-known fundamentalist and radical mosque in the New York area. And the mosque, in fact, that spawned, in the refugee center that spawned the blind Sheikh Rahman, who was behind many terrorist attacks of the early 1990s. Now, Juma had been seen with Mohammed Atta in Florida and had been reported, but no one had put much more flesh on it than that. In the days after 9/11, young Juma disappeared from the United States. He is now on the FBI's most wanted list and suspected of being a very senior Al-Qaeda operative. He's known as Jafar the Pilot. That's his nickname. And the senior law enforcement official with whom Anthony has spoken says that Juma gives him nightmares. His presence walking about in the world still gives him nightmares. And that's a very interesting tie that has been developed out of this work that Tony and our colleague have done this weekend, and which we lead into very much in our book, The 11th Day.
Right. Now, if I understand everything correctly, there's no suggestion anything was known about this house or these people prior to 9/11. The point here is that this seems to be part of a pattern of not investigating or even suppressing information about Saudi involvement.
Suppressing, yes, absolutely. When I talked to Senator Graham for this story, he pointed out that he's outraged that with his special interest in Florida, because he's twice been governor of the state of Florida, that as in his role as co-chair of the Congressional Joint Committee into 9/11, that he was not informed by the FBI. The arrangement with the intelligence agencies was that they should share everything with the congressional inquiry, which was made up, which was specifically an inquiry into the performance of the intelligence agencies. So he's outraged that he wasn't told about this FBI investigation in Sarasota, which did happen and which went on for about 6 months. But he says he's outraged, but he's not surprised, because a mirror image investigation was conducted in California, where there was also apparently a form of support network for the first two hijackers to arrive in the United States as early as the millennium in January 2000. And the FBI did not inform the committee about that either until they stumbled on it for themselves.
Yeah, these are the two hijackers that Richard Clarke has said in the last little while that the CIA knew about and didn't inform either him, the anti-terrorism czar, or the FBI. And apparently they'd been in the country for almost a year prior to 9/11.
That's right. That's part of a longer story. In the year before 9/11, those two hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, had come to the attention of the CIA. They were being surveilled. The CIA has claimed since that in January 2000, right after they attended a terrorist conference, if you will, in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, that they simply lost them. Now, that answer has not satisfied many people. And it certainly hasn't satisfied the FBI or the State Department, who the CIA never told about the fact that these two known jihadis had visas to enter the United States. Now, putting the issue of the CIA's either incompetence or otherwise aside, the FBI was also involved in watching terrorists in California and watching known jihadis in California. And they too had opportunities that might have allowed them to surveil these young hijackers if they had taken them. One of those opportunities was afforded to them by a man who provided accommodation to the two hijackers, who it turned out, the joint inquiry discovered, was actually an FBI informant. This is what angers Senator Graham so substantially. The FBI never told the joint inquiry that this man had been an FBI informant. Their investigators turned it up for themselves and confronted the FBI with the information.
Now, did they also not find financial links between the Saudi government, even the Saudi embassy in the United States? There's even been suggestions about Saudi Ambassador Bandar's wife, but certain kind of financial support and links that went to this fellow you're talking about.
I think one should not make too much of this. I mean, it is certainly interesting that money... Let me explain how Prince Bandar, the ambassador's wife, name comes into it. The first two hijackers to arrive in the United States, Robin has just been talking about, Mida and Hazmi, met up with a man believed by many people to have been for several years previously a Saudi intelligence agent living in the state of California. He in turn had another friend who's again got a very interesting background, who again is a Saudi, whose wife received injections of money, supposedly in connection with a health problem, and in turn passed that money that she'd received from the Saudi embassy as a sort of welfare payment, passed it on to the fellow that helped the hijackers, Bayoumi. But I think this stuff came from the Saudi embassy as literally as a welfare payment that came in the name of the ambassador's wife. I don't think it's necessary, and it's certainly not provable, it's not necessary to assume that the ambassador's wife personally knew why the money might be going in the direction it was.
Right. Well, one thing that's clear is that the joint inquiry that Graham led had a whole section on the role of the Saudis in 9/11, almost all of which was redacted when the report went public. And Graham said his main divergence with the official 9/11 Commission was that they didn't deal with the Saudi role. So in part two of our interviews with Anthony Summers and Robin Swan, let's delve a little further into what seems to be the role of at least senior members of the Saudi royal family and government in the events of the attacks of 9/11. Please join us for part two of this interview on the Real News Network.